You can't bring weapons on the plane. The TSA agent held up the Bronze Star like it was trash. Looks like metal to me. You probably bought this at a pawn shop anyway. 84-year-old Eugene Harper watched in horror as his Purple Heart, his Bronze Star, and a letter from his dead best friend got dumped into the airport trash bin like garbage. But this TSA agent had no idea that 23 veterans were watching. And what happened next created a new law that every airport in America follows today. If you've ever worn a uniform, if you've ever known anyone or had family serve this country, or if you just believe our veterans deserve basic respect, hit that like button right now, because what you're about to see will make your blood boil, and these heroes deserve to know that 50 million people have their backs. Don't just watch this story, be part of it. Share and subscribe. The fluorescent lights of Dallas International Airport buzz like angry wasps at 7:45 a.m., casting harsh shadows across Terminal B's polished floors. The morning rush was in full swing, a symphony of rolling luggage wheels, crying babies, and the sharp bark of TSA agents directing the endless stream of travelers through security checkpoints, laptops out, shoes off, belts in the bin. Eugene Harper stood quietly in line, his weathered hands gripping the worn leather handles of an old military duffel bag. At 84, he moved with the deliberate grace of a man who had learned long ago that rushing rarely solved anything. His faded navy bomber jacket, though showing its age, was pressed and clean, and the worn navy cap perched on his silver head bore the subtle dignity of someone who had earned the right to wear it. The bag at his feet contained more than clothes. Wrapped carefully in tissue paper and tucked into a small leather pouch with a fragment of a life spent in service. A Bronze Star that still caught the light despite its tarnished edges. A Purple Heart earned on a beach in Korea that most Americans have forgotten. And a photograph of 19 young men who never made a home. There was also a letter, folded so many times the creases had worn soft, written by his best friend Tommy just 3 days before a sniper's bullet ended their boyhood dreams forever. Eugene didn't consider these items precious because of their monetary value. He knew they were worth nothing to anyone but him. They were precious because they were proof. Proof that he had been there. Proof that Tommy had existed. Proof that the boy from rural Texas had answered his country's call and somehow lived to tell about it. The line shuffled forward, and Eugene noticed a young TSA agent at Checkpoint 3 seemed particularly agitated this morning. The agent's nameplate read K. Renshaw, and his movements were sharp, impatient, dismissive. Eugene had seen that look before, in the eyes of young soldiers who thought they knew everything about war before they'd heard their first shot fired in anger. As Eugene approached the checkpoint, he offered a small nod of acknowledgement he'd been giving to authority figures for 8 decades. It was neither servile nor challenging. Simply the gesture of a man who understood respect was something you gave first, not something you demanded. He had no idea that in the next 5 minutes, a simple act of casual cruelty would ignite a chain reaction that would make the Harper Rule a household name across America, or that the contents of his worn duffel bag would become the center of a national conversation about honor, dignity, and what we owe to those who served. Eugene Harper just wanted to catch his flight, to visit his daughter in Phoenix. He had no way of knowing that 23 veterans and active duty service members were scattered throughout the terminal that morning, or that one of them had a phone ready to record what was about to unfold. Sometimes history turns on moments so small they seem insignificant, until they're not. Next, Kyle Renshaw's voice cut through the terminal noise like a blade. He was 26 years old, had been working TSA for 8 months, and was already tired of dealing with what he considered the endless parade of entitled travelers who thought airport security was optional. Eugene stepped forward, placing his duffel bag on the stainless steel table with the same care he might use to set down a sleeping child. "Good morning, son," he said quietly. Kyle didn't acknowledge the greeting. He was scrolling through his phone with one hand, while mechanically waving Eugene toward the metal detector with the other. "Shoes off, belt off, everything in the bins. Move it along." Eugene complied without complaint, though his arthritic fingers struggled with his belt buckle. Behind him, other passengers shuffled impatiently, checking their watches and sighing audibly. A businessman in an expensive suit muttered something about old people slowing down the line, while Eugene navigated the metal detector, which beeped twice before finally clearing him. Kyle had begun rifling through the duffel bag with the enthusiasm of someone late for lunch. He pulled out folded shirts, a shaving kit, a paperback copy of the Bridges at Tokery, tossing each item onto the table with increasing carelessness. Then his fingers found the leather pouch. "What's this?" Kyle asked, though he didn't wait for an answer before dumping the contents onto the metal surface. The Bronze Star clinked against the table edge. The photograph of the 19 young soldiers fluttered to the floor. Tommy's letter began to unfold from decades of careful creasing. Eugene's face went pale. "Please, son, be careful with—" "Sir, I need you to step back," Kyle interrupted, not looking up. He picked up the Bronze Star, examining it with the casual interest someone might show a bottle cap. "You can't bring weapons on the plane." That's not a weapon," Eugene said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's a Bronze Star. For valor in combat." Kyle held up the medal, its ribbon faded but still bearing the distinctive red, white, and blue stripes. "Looks like metal to me. Sharp edges. Could be used as a weapon." He glanced at Eugene with something that might have been amusement. "You probably bought this at a pawn shop anyway." The words hit Eugene like a physical blow. Around them, the usual airport chaos seemed to fade into background noise. A middle-aged woman in line behind them gasped audibly. A young father pulled his son closer, sensing something had shifted in the air. "Son," Eugene said, and his voice carried the weight of every battlefield he'd walked, every friend he'd buried. Every night he'd woken up screaming Tommy's name. "That medal was awarded to me by my commanding officer on Hill 255 in Korea, after I carried 3 wounded Marines to safety under enemy fire. That photograph is of my unit. 19 boys who trusted me to bring them home. 18 of them didn't make it." Kyle wasn't listening. He was already walking toward the large gray bin marked "Prohibited Items," the Bronze Star dangling carelessly from his fingers. "Look, Pops, I don't have time for war stories. Rules are rules. This stuff can't go on the plane." "Please," Eugene said, and the word came out cracked, desperate. "That's my life you're holding." But Kyle had already dropped the metal into the bin with a metallic clang that seemed to echo through the terminal. The Purple Heart followed. Then Tommy's letter, which he crumpled slightly in his haste to dispose of it. Eugene stood frozen, watching 60 years of memory disappear into a trash bin. His hands were shaking now, and his eyes had filled with tears he was too proud to let fall. "You can't." He started, then stopped. What was the point? He'd spent his whole life following orders, respecting authority, believing in the system. "God bless you," he whispered finally, the words coming out like a prayer for the soul of a young man who didn't know what he'd just done. Kyle was already waving the next passenger forward. Eugene Harper forgotten, before he'd even finished collecting his remaining belongings. But Eugene Harper wasn't forgotten. Not by everyone. 20 feet away, sitting at a cafe table with a clear view of Checkpoint 3, Marcus Lane lowered his phone and stared at the screen. The former Marine turned Homeland Security investigator had captured every moment of the encounter, and his hands were trembling with rage. He'd seen a lot of things in his 15 years of government service, but he'd never seen an 84-year-old veteran treated like garbage for the crime of carrying his own medals. The video was already uploading to a secure server, and Marcus's fingers were flying across his phone's keyboard, sending a message to a group chat that included some very influential people. The message was simple. "You need to see this. Terminal B, Checkpoint 3. Now." Within 60 seconds, phones were buzzing throughout Dallas International Airport. If you're not subscribed yet, you're part of the problem. Every person who scrolls past without subscribing is telling the world that veterans don't matter. Don't be that person. Hit subscribe now, and let's make sure stories like Eugene's get the respect they deserve. Our veterans didn't fight for our freedom, so you could ignore their story. Meanwhile, Major Darian Knox was reviewing flight manifests in the airport security office when his encrypted phone vibrated. The message from Marcus was brief but urgent. Knox pulled up the video link, his coffee growing cold as he watched Kyle Renshaw casually destroy an old man's dignity. By the third viewing, Knox's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He immediately forwarded the video to his personal network, an informal brotherhood of active duty and veterans who kept in touch across the country. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos was boarding a commercial flight in uniform when she saw the video. She quietly deplaned and headed toward Terminal B. Captain James Fletcher, waiting for a connecting flight, watched the footage twice before standing up and walking purposefully toward the security checkpoint. Technical Sergeant Robert Kim, still in his Air Force blues from a ceremony that morning, received the video while grabbing breakfast. He left his meal untouched. They came from different services, different backgrounds, different generations. Some were in uniform, others in civilian clothes. A Navy petty officer, 2 Army Rangers on leave, an older Vietnam vet wearing his service cap, a young Coast Guard officer, 3 Marines who didn't know each other, but moved with the same quiet purpose. Within 10 minutes, they converged near Checkpoint 3 like iron filings drawn to a magnet. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. The code was simple and unspoken. When one of their own was disrespected, they responded, not with violence or threats, but with presence. Kyle, busy harassing a college student about the size of her shampoo bottle, gradually became aware of the gathering crowd. At first he ignored them. Then he noticed the uniforms, the bearing, the way they stood with military precision, watching him. "What's this supposed to be?" he called out, his voice carrying false bravado. "Some kind of military flash mob?" The silence that followed was deafening. 23 service members stared back at him without blinking, without moving, without giving him the reaction he was fishing for. Marcus Lane stepped forward from the group, his Homeland Security credentials visible in his hand. "Agent Marcus Lane, Department of Homeland Security," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I need to speak with you about your handling of prohibited items." Kyle's cocky demeanor flickered. "I was just doing my job, following protocol." "Protocol?" Marcus's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath. "Show me the regulation that classifies military decorations as weapons." Kyle's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Around them, passengers had stopped to watch, phones emerging from pockets and purses. The terminal's usual chaos had given way to an electric tension. "You didn't just confiscate items," Marcus continued, walking to the prohibited bin. "You discarded the Bronze Star of an 84-year-old veteran. You threw away a Purple Heart earned in Korea. You crumpled a letter from a fallen Marine." Each word landed like a hammer blow. Kyle's face had gone from flushed to pale. Marcus reached into the bin with reverent care, retrieving each item as if handling sacred relics. The Bronze Star caught the fluorescent light as he lifted it. Tommy's letter, though wrinkled, was still readable. "This man," Marcus said, turning toward where Eugene sat hunched on a nearby bench, head in his hands, "bled for your right to wear that uniform. He carried wounded Marines under fire. He watched his friends die so you could have the freedom to treat him like garbage." The terminal had gone completely quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of jets on the runway. "I want his supervisor," Marcus announced to no one in particular. "And I want the TSA administrator. Now." Kyle looked around desperately, but found no support among his colleagues, who had backed away as if he carried something contagious. Even the terminal's usual background noise seemed muted, as if the entire airport was holding its breath. The circle of service members remained motionless, their silent presence more powerful than any shouted accusation could have been. Marcus approached Eugene with measured steps, the recovered items cradled in his hands like precious cargo. The old veteran hadn't looked up since sitting down, his shoulders curved inward as if trying to make himself invisible. "Sir," Marcus said softly, kneeling beside the bench. Eugene lifted his head slowly, his eyes red-rimmed but dry. When he saw his medals in Marcus's hands, something broke open in his chest, a sound caught between a sob and a sigh. "I thought they were gone forever," Eugene whispered, his voice barely audible above the terminal's ambient noise. "Not on our watch, sir." Marcus carefully placed a leather pouch in Eugene's trembling hands. "Never on our watch." Eugene's fingers traced the Bronze Star's edges, then moved to Tommy's letter. The paper was creased differently now, but the words were still there, still promising to write home, still talking about the girl he planned to marry, still alive in ink that had survived 6 decades. Without a word or signal, Every service member in uniform around them came to attention. Then, in perfect synchronization, they dropped to one knee. The effect was immediate and profound. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Children pointed. Business travelers looked up from their phones. Even the TSA agents at other checkpoints turned to stare. A little girl broke free from her mother's grip and ran toward Eugene, clutching a small paper American flag she'd been carrying. "Thank you for keeping us safe," she said, pressing it into his free hand. Eugene looked at the flag, then at the faces surrounding him, young and old, different services, different wars, but united in recognition of something larger than themselves. "I just wanted to fly to Phoenix," he said, his voice stronger now, "to see my daughter." "And you will," Marcus replied, helping him to his feet, "with full honors." Behind them, Kyle Renshaw stood forgotten, watching his career crumble in real time as phone cameras captured every moment of Eugene Harper's redemption. By noon, the video had escaped the confines of Dallas International Airport and begun its relentless march across social media. What started as Marcus's secure message to military contacts had multiplied exponentially as passengers shared their own footage from different angles. Hashtag Metal Respect began trending within 2 hours. Hashtag Harper Rule followed an hour later. Hashtag Honor Him exploded across platforms as users shared the story with increasing outrage and admiration. The footage was compelling in its stark contrast. Kyle's casual cruelty juxtaposed against the silent dignity of Eugene and the unified response of America's service members. News outlets picked up the story by 2 p.m., transforming a local incident into national conversation. Eugene, meanwhile, was unaware of his viral fame. He'd made his flight to Phoenix, clutching his recovered medals and the little girl's paper flag. His daughter Janet met him at baggage claim, confused by the reporters shouting questions and the small crowd of veterans who'd gathered to shake his hand. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked as they escaped her car. "I'm not entirely sure, sweetheart. Something happened at the airport this morning. Some very good people helped me out." While Eugene enjoyed a quiet dinner with his daughter, unaware that his name was being spoken in Pentagon briefing rooms and congressional offices, the consequences were already cascading through the system. TSA Administrator Patricia Wells received her first angry call from a senator at 3:47 p.m. By 5 p.m., she'd fielded 12 more. Kyle Renshaw was suspended pending investigation before the evening news cycle began. The agency's public relations team worked frantically to craft a response, but the narrative had already crystallized. An elderly veteran's dignity had been trampled by bureaucratic indifference, and America's military family had risen to defend their own. Eugene Harper had become a symbol, whether he wanted to be or not. 3 months later, Eugene Harper walked slowly through the town square of his small Texas hometown, just as he had every Sunday for the past decade. But now, something had changed. The Bronze Star was pinned to his jacket, along with the Purple Heart, and 2 other decorations he'd rarely worn in public before. Not out of pride. Eugene had never been a man who sought attention, but because a nation had reminded him that his service mattered. The Harper Rule had become official TSA policy within 6 weeks of the incident. Military decorations were now handled with white-glove protocols at every checkpoint in America. Kyle Renshaw had been terminated and was working security at a shopping mall in Tulsa, a fact that brought Eugene no satisfaction. Letters still arrived at his small house on Maple Street, hundreds of them from veterans, active duty personnel, and civilians who'd been moved by his story. Eugene read every one, though he answered few. What was there to say? He'd simply tried to board a plane with his memories. The Secretary of Defense had sent a formal letter of apology on behalf of a grateful nation. A senator had invited him to Washington for a ceremony he'd politely declined. The mayor had offered to name a street after him, an honor Eugene had gently refused. But the children in the town square had taken to saluting him as he passed, their small hands snapping to their foreheads with the serious precision of youth. Their parents would nod respectfully, and Eugene would tip his Navy cap in return. "Why do you still walk the same route every Sunday?" his daughter Janet had asked during her last visit. Eugene had considered the question carefully before answering. "Because some things shouldn't change just because the world notices them. Tommy and the boys, they're still with me whether there are cameras or not." As he completed his circuit and headed home, Eugene Harper carried himself with a quiet dignity that had defined his life long before a TSA agent's cruelty had made him famous. The medals on his chest caught the late afternoon sunlight, but they weren't for show. They were reminders, not just of his service, but of a morning when strangers became brothers, when silence spoke louder than words, and when America remembered that honor isn't just about the past. It's about how we treat those who secured our future, one small act of respect at a time. Eugene Harper never asked to be famous. He just wanted to carry his friend Tommy's letter on a plane. But while you were watching this video, one veteran took his own life today. Yeah, you heard that right. One, every single day. So here's what I need you to do. And I'm not asking, I'm telling you. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell and share this video with 3 people who need to see it. Because the only thing worse than disrespecting our veterans is staying silent about it. Eugene carried his medals with dignity for 60 years. The least you can do is carry his story for 60 seconds by sharing it. Don't scroll past this. Don't think someone else will do it. You do it right now. Because if we don't stand up for our Eugene Harpers, who will?